Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Skepticism 101 and remote lecture number 4 on pathways to evil. Again, apologize for the home studio here. That's where we're at here in this week of coronavirus pandemic. And so we're self-isolating. I am once again in the Shermer home studio, a.k.a. my garage. And it's been kind of interesting watching guests on various talk shows on television that no one's in studio anymore. So they all have their home studios, which really are not any better than this. So we're all making do with what we can. I do have a professional microphone here, so hopefully that makes the sound a little bit better. And I'll try to make the videos work with this Panopto system. So let's get started. So at the end of the last lecture on cults, I ended up asking the rhetorical question, how can you get people to commit suicide? In this lecture, I want to ask, how can you get people to commit evil? And so this is a lecture really on the psychological pathways to evil and asking, again, how can you get people to do this? That is, not just salute the guy on the left, but burn bodies in an open pit. That's at Auschwitz-Birkenau on the right. How and why did this happen? Or this, or this, or this. So I've been interested in the subject pretty much my entire adult life. It's one of the reasons I went into the social sciences, particularly psychology, to try to understand this. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I, like so many people were at the time, really still are, fascinated by the Nazis and World War II. I just was always curious in my mind, how do you get people to do this? There's got to be a way to scientifically understand that. So I ended up writing a book about this, well, 2 books really, The Science of Good and Evil in 2003, and then The Moral Arc in 2015. So I'll be working from mostly those 2 books and other material. So I began with the understanding that we evolved a dual moral nature. That is, we have an element of the good side of us, our inner, our better angels, that is within group amity. And we also have some between group enmity, and that's some of our dark side. So in other words, when you ask, are people good or evil by nature, that's the wrong question. Obviously, we're both. We have the capacity to do both good and evil. We have inner demons, we have better angels. We have a little bit of Oskar Schindler in us. We also have a little bit of Amma Gert from Schindler's List here. And if you recall the story, I mean, it's not like Oskar Schindler was a saint. But when given the opportunity to do the right thing, he did. He made a volitional choice to help Jews during the Second World War. And Amma Gert, he went down the dark path. And it could have gone differently, but that's the way it went. Why is that? So in terms of evolutionary theory, that is within our group, as members of a group, we evolved this capacity for altruism, reciprocal altruism, cooperation, prosociality, warm feelings toward our fellow group members. Not so much for members of other groups. So that's why I call that between group enmity. And here I'm not talking just about tribalism, which comes up later in this lecture. No, I'm talking about the feelings individuals have for other individuals. Continuing, the second moral principle is reciprocity. I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. This is the part of evolutionary theory that explains why we would be cooperative, prosocial, altruistic with members of a group, our own group, or another group who are not our genetic kind. And we're not genetically related to it, and that is that if we help others, they're more likely to help us. If others help us, we're more likely to help them. The famous experiments on vampire bats here on the upper left. These little critters have an incredible capacity to recall who regurgitated blood for them. Now, these are highly energetic, high metabolism mammals who need to consume a lot of calories every day. And they're not always successful. And that's very dangerous. So they've evolved a mechanism of food sharing, that is, regurgitating blood that they got to others who didn't, and studies show that they keep track of this sort of thing. Okay, all mammals do this to a certain extent, particularly primates. So I've, in The Science of Good and Evil, I developed this chart to kind of show this relationship of the expanding moral sphere. Ourselves are identical twins in the center, our parents and offspring in the second ring, full offspring and fraternal twins, our grandparents, aunts and uncles, half-siblings, grandchildren, full nieces in the next circle out. These are just genetic, diminishing genetic relations as we move out to aunts and uncles, great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, first cousins once removed, and so on. At some point, you cross this barrier where the people that you're encountering are not genetically related to you at all, but they're members of your in-group, so here you get some reciprocal altruism. Strangers in other groups and other members of our species, other species, all sentient beings and the entire biosphere. Okay, it's hard to get people to care about these outer rings because there's no direct connection to us, so why should I care? Well, you can trick the system into making, say, other people, some other part of the world, honorary members of your group, your family, honorary family members, by tricking your brain into getting you to identify with one individual. So I call this the Indugu effect. Little Indugu was the little African boy in the Jack Nicholson film about Schmidt, where he adopts this boy that he sees advertised on TV by this nonprofit. And I've done this. They send you a package with a picture of one little boy or girl. I had adopted a girl in Romania. And they show you the picture of her. Here's her home. Here's her siblings. She's playing with soccer balls. This is her hobbies. And, your $30 a month will get her, potable water and vitamins and, 3 square meals a day and so forth. So there I kind of felt like I actually care about that person. But if you sent me a picture of 10,000 starving children in Africa or Romania or whatever, it would be hard for me to care. And so that's why those nonprofits develop those things. So the arc of the moral universe has been bending more and more to expand the moral sphere to include these yellow rings out here that people were not genetically related to. And so much of this lecture is how that breaks down. That system we've evolved over millennia has broken down, and we revert to evil against those people. So we have a dual human nature for good and evil involving fairness and justice, helping and hurting, cooperative and competitive, altruistic and greedy. We have better angels and inner demons. So I'm going to show you a video clip here, just like 30 seconds long. I'm not even sure where this is. I think it's in a train station in Europe somewhere. And so you're going to see, let me get my little laser pointer up here. I'll just use the little arrow here. So these 3 people are talking. Then all of a sudden, for some reason, this guy here reaches over and shoves this woman backwards, and she staggers back. He tries to grab her before she can fall into the pit, and she falls into the train pit. Okay, if the train's coming, she's dead. All right, so this guy, he's just about to help her, but then all of a sudden, something snaps in his brain. You can see this. And he, instead of grabbing her, he turns and cold cocks this guy. I mean, it's a beauty. Just twice. Bam, bam. And then he kind of pulls back for just a second, and you can see the wheels turning like, wait, there was something else I was supposed to do. Oh, yeah, I got to rescue this woman. So he goes down and rescues her and pulls her out of the pit, and then, and then this guy here takes off. Okay, so now you'll see this guy at the top of the screen. He's an EMT or something, I don't know, and he comes running down to help. But instead of helping pull this woman out of the pit, he takes off after the guy who did the deed. Okay, here's that little video clip. Okay, let me see. Here we go. Here we go. Okay, let's watch it again, just because it's really quite stunning. Again, this guy here has done something very bad, and you can tell this guy's conflicted. I want to help her. I want to harm him for the evil he did. My point of this is that we have this dual nature. We want to help and we want to harm. We want justice. We want people to get their just desserts, and this guy cannot help himself. And again, the guy at the top, the EMT, when he arrives, she's still in the pit. He should help her, but no, he can't help himself either. So this is a deep sense we have about right and wrong. So these are emotions. So emotions evolved. What are emotions? They evolved in order to direct behavior towards survival and flourishing. That is, take something super simple like hunger and sexual attraction. So we don't do any calculations. This isn't some utility calculus of how many calories we need per day, and then we walk around trying to consume that many calories. You may do that, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because you're getting signals from your brain, basically from your hypothalamus, which releases hormones into your system that makes you feel hungry. And same thing with sexual attraction. We know what makes people sexually attracted to one another. Tons of studies on this. Males like females with a 0.67 to 0.7 waist to hip ratio and an hourglass figure and symmetrical features, facial features, and clear complexion. Women are attracted to men who have that sort of broad shoulders, narrow waist, again, symmetrical face, clear complexion. These are all signals of genetic health. But no one walks around with calipers, measuring waist-hip ratios and the broadness of shoulders and so on. We just feel sexually attracted to other people. So our emotions are a heuristic, kind of a shortcut to behavior that you don't have time or energy to calculate. And in that rubric, we also have moral emotions: guilt, shame, empathy, contempt, vengeance, and remorse. And these evolve to guide our behavior in interaction with others. So again, there's, of course, cultural differences between what people feel guilty about. If you're Catholic, you feel guilty about this. If you're Jewish, you feel guilty about that. If you're Asian, you feel guilty about this. If you're a Westerner, you feel guilty about that. Here, I'm only interested in why you would feel guilty about anything at all. What's the point of guilt? And in my theory, it's to drive you to certain behavior. That is to say, when you harm somebody else, when you violate a contract, an oath, when you dishonor somebody and hurt somebody else, you should feel guilty. That's normal. And shame. You want to shame somebody who does that to you or to somebody who you know. And vengeance and revenge. These are powerful emotions for a really good reason. Okay, my favorite, continuing on this, love, affection, and caring lead us to help. For example, anger leads us to strike out, fight back, and defend ourselves against predators, bullies, and abusers. Fear causes us to pull back, retreat, and escape from risks. Disgust directs us to push out, eject, and expel that which is bad for us, such as bodily excreta and other disease vectors. And jealousy leads us to mate guarding. So these are different emotions related to moral situations. Again, shortcuts to getting us to act a certain way that is good for survival and flourishing, either of individuals or the whole group. So we'll see, for example, that getting people to fear some other group or to think of people in another group as disease vectors or bodily excreta. I mean, this is what the Nazis did with the Jews. But it's so cliche, pretty much every genocide, every pogrom can be tracked back to some cliched metaphor of disgust and fear about the other. And that drives people to feel angry about these other people that are harming us, and then that leads them to commit violence. Okay, so you see where I'm going with this. My favorite example of this comes from Franz de Waal and his famous capuchin monkeys. So the setup to this video, although Franz will narrate this, and this is on YouTube, it's quite humorous to watch, but these monkeys are trained to exchange pebbles for food. So the pebbles are like money. And so the experimenter hands the capuchin a pebble, hands it back, and he gets a piece of food. And you can see in the container there beneath her elbow is some sliced cucumber. And they like sliced cucumbers. But then the one on the right, when he exchanges the pebble, he gets a grape. Now you'll watch the one on the left get very excited about this, like, oh boy, I'm going to get a grape. Because, cucumbers are nice, but grapes are better. They're sweet, right? So it's more rewarding. Anyway, so you'll see what happens then when he doesn't get a grape, when she gives him a cucumber, and he is not happy about this.
Get a grape and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And the other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So you can hear Franz is giving this lecture. I think it was at TED. The audience finds that rather amusing. Of course, I do too, but to me it's more telling that deep inside the brain of these little capuchin monkeys, they're separated from us by 35 million years for our last common ancestor. And yet they still have a sense of injustice. Like, that was wrong and that was not cool. And I am pissed. Okay. Now, I should add parenthetically, to be scientific about this, my friend Richard Wrangham at Harvard and his team, they say they've run this experiment also. And they don't think it's an immoral emotion of anger or revenge or injustice, but that it has more to do with the basic food reward capacity of grapes versus cucumbers. And it's debatable, they say, about whether this has anything to do with moral emotions. But in any case, let's just set that aside, because my deeper point is that we have these kind of dual emotions that are in there. And there's a reason that we want to commit revenge on people that have done us harm. There's kind of an evolutionary logic to it, because if you don't strike back against people that harm you, that take advantage of you, that bully you, that free ride on the system, you can be harmed, the group can be harmed. And so now we have a lot of data about how hunter-gatherers deal with people that are like this: bullies, free riders, people that don't play nice by the rules, that don't follow the norms. Everything from gossiping about them, talking to them, scolding them, to punishing them, shunning them, and even capital punishment. If you got some bully that he's just not going to play along with the rules, he's not going to honor his promises and so forth, he's not a nice person. They will actually take this guy out and execute him. Okay, so this is serious stuff, and but there's an evolutionary logic to it. If you don't do that, then too many people will be tempted to free ride, bully, take what is not theirs, and then the whole system will fall apart. And again, I'm not into group selection. I mean, the group harmony harms the individuals who are the target of selection. Okay. So in a way, we resemble bonobos in the sense that we're relatively peaceful compared to chimps. We have face-to-face sex. We like oral sex. We have make-up sex. This is what bonobos do. And the human bonobo brain similarity in area 15.1 in the frontal cortex, right up here, mediates the inhibition of aggression. And this is different in chimpanzees. So this comes from early research by Richard Wrangham, and he's followed up on this in his more recent work. And I wrote about this first in The Science of Good and Evil. But we also resemble chimps in that we're tribal. We're violent, we're predatory, and groups will attack other groups, and particularly attack weaker chimps and isolated monkeys. So if we outnumber them, attack. If they outnumber us, run. And we know these chimps are can be quite violent, quite different than bonobos. So as Jared Diamond says, we're the third chimpanzee. We're a little bit of bonobo, a little bit of chimpanzee. And so we live in a world with tribes, and those tribes are separated by walls. And on those walls are men with guns. And that's really an example from one of my favorite movies, A Few Good Men. So to set up this video clip, so Jack Nicholson plays this kind of leather-tough Marine Colonel Nathan R. Jessup, who is running the program at Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo in Cuba, and he rides a hard, he runs a hard troop there because they got to be tough. Tom Cruise plays this lawyer who is defending these two Marines who were under Jack Nicholson's charge, who disciplined a slacking Marine under this unspoken code red. So Jack Nicholson informally tells his underlings, tell these two Marines to rough up the slacker Marine because we need discipline here. And he orders a code red. But code red is not legal. And anyway, Nicholson hears about this and he wants to get... Tom Cruise hears about this. He wants to get Jack Nicholson's character to admit that that's what he did. And but it's the speech that Nicholson gives. It's so good. It was written by a speechwriter who meant it to be a characterization of that kind of conservative military attitudes about morals. But in fact, he makes a pretty good point about the way of the world. Okay, so let's cut to that clip here.
If you gave an order that Santiago wasn't to be touched, and your orders are always followed, then why would Santiago be in danger? Why would it be necessary to transfer him off the base?
Santiago was a substandard Marine. He was being transferred.
Not what you said. You said he was being transferred because he was in grave danger.
That's correct.
You said he was in danger. I said grave danger. You said this.
I recall what I said.
I had the court reporter read back to you.
I know what I said. I don't have to have it read back to me like I did.
Why did you orders? Colonel?
Sometimes men take matters into their own hands.
You never take matters in your own hands. Your men follow orders or people die. So Santiago shouldn't have been in any danger of shooting, Colonel.
You snotty little bastard.
Your Honor, I'd like to ask for recess. I'd like to answer the question, Judge.
The court will wait for an answer.
If Lieutenant Kendrick gave an order that Santiago wasn't to be touched, then why did he have to be transferred? Colonel, Lieutenant Kendrick ordered the code red, didn't he? Because that's what you told Lieutenant Kendrick to do. Objection! When you went back, you cut these guys loose! Your Honor, you are to sign a phony transfer! Your Honor, you doctored the logbook! You must have doctored yourself in contempt! Colonel Justice, did you order the code red?
You don't have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's going to do it? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep for Santiago and you curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have that luxury of not knowing what I know. That Santiago's death, while tragic, probably saved lives. And my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want truth because deep down places you don't talk about at parties. You want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide, and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a weapon and stand post. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you are entitled to.
Did you order the code red?
I did the job. Did you order the code red? Goddamn right I did!
Boom. Got him. Wow. That's a powerful statement there. It's, again, meant to be critical of that kind of conservative militia, military type attitude. But in fact, I think it's accurate. I think that is the kind of world we live in, a world with walls. And on those walls are men with guns. In my perspective, my future vision, there's no political borders at all, no walls, but we don't live in that world. This is the world we live in. And I think that captures that dual nature of why we have those moral emotions, because that's the world we evolved in, a dangerous world, a world with tribes that were really dangerous. Jared Diamond makes this point in Guns, Germs, and Steel and some of his other books, but to me privately, that, he was out hiking, birding with one of his Papua New Guinean friends who encounter some stranger from another group, another tribe. And Jared just wants to walk over and meet them and shake their hand. And his host is going, "Are you out of your mind? This guy could kill us. We have no idea what's going on here." In other words, the sort of civilized way of extending your hand, shaking, or now with coronavirus, the elbow bump, that's crazy. You don't do that. That's new. That's not the world we evolved our moral emotions in. Anyway, my other favorite example, since I came of age with Star Trek, the original series, there's a nice clip where this is the episode where Captain Kirk is split into two people. The always malfunctioning transporter splits him into the good Kirk and the evil Kirk. So it's just a metaphor in an entertaining way of that kind of dual human nature. So he's split, and the good Kirk is still in charge of the Enterprise, but he can't make decisions because he's just doesn't have that other side of him. So and the way Roddenberry set this up is that Spock is sort of the uber logical part of our brain, and McCoy is kind of the uber emotional, and Captain Kirk is kind of the blending between McCoy and Spock of both emotions and rationality. So here's that little clip. At the 5:40 mark.
Function as captain. You must be prepared. You aware of that Spock? Yes. Always, Doctor.
I think we better bind him.
Yes, all right. What's the matter with me?
Judging from my observations, Captain,
You're rapidly losing a power of decision.
you have a point, Spock.
Yes. Always, Doctor.
I have an unusual
Opportunity
opportunity
to appraise the human mind.
or to examine in Earth terms the roles of good and evil
in a man.
his negative side, which we call hostility, lust, violence,
And his positive side, which Earth people express as compassion, love, tenderness.
Captain,
Are
you aware of that, Spock?
Yes.
And what is it that makes one man an exceptional leader? We see here indication that it is his negative side which makes him strong. That his evil side, if you will, properly controlled and disciplined, is vital to his strength.
Your negative side,
Remove
from you.
the power of mind
Begins
begins
to
to
elude
elude.
you.
What is your point, Mr. Spock?
If your
Our
power of mind
command
continues to weaken,
weaken.
it will soon be unable to function as captain.
Okay, there you go. That makes the point nicely, I think. So, but let me bring it home to you personally, viewer, students. Have you ever fantasized about killing someone you don't like? Okay, show of hands. Okay, you should all be showing. Most of you should be raising your hands. Maybe not everybody. This is an experiment run by my friend and colleague David Buss, who wrote a book about his research on this, which he asked people that question. His book is The Murderer Next Door, Why the Mind is Designed to Kill. again, the point from an evolutionary perspective is that it's not a bug, it's a feature. There's a reason we have the capacity to kill, to be angry, to be violent. It's logical to have those moral emotions in us for very good evolutionary reasons because of the world we evolved in, which is very dangerous with a lot of nasty people and bullies and free riders and so on you have to deal with. That's the point of this. Okay, so he asked this question. Have you ever considered killing somebody that you don't like? Here's the difference between males and females on frequently considering fantasizing about that and occasionally thinking about it. So men more than women do, but women almost catch up on occasionally thinking about this. The examples are humorous. One guy said he went 80% of the way toward killing a former friend and now a jealous rival. Here's what he wrote. First, I would break every bone in his body, starting with his fingers and toes, slowly making my way to larger ones. Then I would puncture his lungs and maybe a few other organs. Basically give him as much pain as possible before killing him. Okay. I mean, you think about medieval torture devices. The point wasn't to kill the person, although ultimately it was. The point was make them suffer before you kill them. Okay. A woman said she went 60% of the way toward killing an ex-boyfriend who threatened to make public their sex video. I actually did this, she wrote. I invited him over for dinner, and as he was in the kitchen looking stupid, peeling the carrots to make a salad, I came to him laughing, gently, so he wouldn't suspect anything. I thought about grabbing a knife quickly and stabbing him in the chest repeatedly until he was dead. I actually did the first thing, but he saw my intentions and ran away. Lucky him. So this is a way of thinking about homicide as self-help justice. That is, most homicides are committed in the act of some moral crusade, some moral adjustment, some response to somebody who did them wrong. The sociologist Donald Black's 1983 paper on this found that 90% of murders are moralistic in nature. In other words, the murderer believed that the victim deserved to die, as opposed to, say, instrumental violence or instrumental homicide, where you kill somebody to take their car or their Rolex watch or whatever. Most homicides are not of an instrumental nature. They are of a moralistic nature. Here's Black's famous paper, Crime as Social Control. It's a way of dealing with conflicts in a society. The sociological theory of social control predicts and explains how people define and respond to deviant behavior. One kind of social control is known as self-help, the expression of a grievance by a unilateral aggression such as personal violence or property destruction. It is commonly believed that self-help was largely displaced by law in the Western world during the Middle Ages, and that it has survived primarily in the traditional, especially stateless society studied by anthropologists. In fact, much of the conduct classified as crime in modern societies such as the United States is similar to these traditional modes of social control and may properly be understood as self-help. Okay, so in other words, particularly in areas where people do not feel that the law serves them properly, or that the state should not be in the business of responding to slights and harms and so on. These are cultures of honor where it's your job to take care of that, not the state. You don't call the police. And if you're a minority, if you're an African American in the southern United States for most of its history, there's good reasons not to trust the law, not to trust the criminal justice system, and to take the law into your own hands. That's what's called self-help justice, and there's, again, good reasons why we evolved the capacity for self-help justice. Some of Black's examples: a man who killed his wife after she dared him to do so during an argument. A woman who killed her husband during a quarrel in which the man struck her daughter, his stepdaughter. A young man killed his brother during a heated discussion about the latter's sexual advances toward his younger sisters. A woman who killed her 21-year-old son because he had been fooling around with homosexuals and drugs. And others during altercations over the parking of an automobile. Yeah, people kill each other over automobile parking spots. It's insane. But it's triggering that deep sense of I need to revenge that harm done to me, even if it's something as trivial as stealing your parking spot. So my approach to this is moral naturalism. That is, I'm taking a scientific approach, a naturalistic assumption about this, that the moral sense in humans and moral principles in human cultures are the result of the laws of nature, the forces of culture, and the unique pathways of history. So far I've been dealing with laws of nature, that is, evolutionary laws of nature. I will now then get into forces of culture, pathways of history. So this evolved moral sense, again, that begins with Darwin. That is, our moral emotions evolved for a good reason, feeling, doing good, righteousness and pride, or the immoral sentiments or emotions, feeling of doing bad, such as guilt and shame. And again, to drive home the point, cultures differ on what behaviors are defined as good or bad, but the moral sense of feeling good or feeling bad about behavior X, whatever X is, that's an evolved universal. So to this extent, I want to talk about the myth of pure good and evil. They don't exist as metaphysical entities. In other words, ontologically speaking, there's not such a thing as good or evil out there hovering in the ether or Platonic archetype. It's in our brains. That's where good and evil exists. In our nature, it's in ourselves. And we have this kind of theological sense that good and evil are out there. But they're not. They're just adjectives. They're not nouns. There's no little evil homunculus in the brain. Now, I should note parenthetically that there are some people that are, these psychopaths that just have this propensity to do this. That's 1 to 3% of the population. About 3% of males, about 1% of females are diagnosed with psychopathy. Most of them are not evil. Most of them do not commit violence. They run, they're CEOs of major corporations, or they're politicians or whatever. But there's a small percentage of those, maybe 1 to 3% of the 1 to 3%. Who have just a screw loose in their brain. It just snaps. And they are kind of demonic in a sense. They get pleasure out of harming other people. Okay, so this kind of sadism. But that's rare. I mean, in sadomasochism, the masochism part is the more dominant one, the more popular one. Anyway, so the idea to say that, Osama bin Laden is evil doesn't explain anything. It's just a word. To say that evil in the Holocaust, Hitler and the Holocaust are evil, that doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't explain it. So evil begins with morality. And as Steve Pinker makes the point in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, if anything, we have too much. There's too much moralizing. So I have a short video clip showing him explaining that nicely at the 150 mark. Okay.
People emerges. But I will mention one trend that I think has been growing over the last decade, and I think will continue to grow, and that is understanding humans as moralizing animals. That if you ask what goes into human nature, there are obvious things like memory, sexual desire, fear, color vision. But we're coming to realize that one component of human nature is the urge to moralize, to pass judgment on others, to formulate universal principles and punish those who violate them. You might think, well, this has tremendous practical applications because the world needs more morality. Maybe if we could find out what makes people moral, we could get people to do more of it. And in fact, I would say the main conclusion from a lot of this research is that that's exactly the opposite of what we should do. The world has far too much morality, at least in the sense of activity of people's moral instincts. If you look, and this became clear to me as I tried to identify the causes of violence at various scales throughout human history, from police blotters, where the biggest motive for homicide is not just amoral predation, a mugger killing someone to steal his Rolex. The biggest categories of motives for homicide are moralistic. In the eyes of the perpetrator, of the murderer, it's capital punishment, killing someone who deserves to die, because whether it's a spouse who's unfaithful, or someone who dissed him in an argument over a parking space, or cheated him in a deal, that's why people kill each other for moral reasons. That is true at large scales as well. If you were to tally up the largest episodes of bloodletting in human history, most of them would have moralistic motives. The Nazi Holocaust, Pol Pot, Stalin, the Gulag, Mao, the European wars of religion, the Crusades, all of them were killing people not because they wanted to accumulate vast amounts of money or huge harems of women, but because they thought they were acting out of a moral cause. One of the reasons is that the human moral sense does not consist of a desire to maximize well-being, to prevent people from harm, but it is a hodgepodge of motives that include deference to a legitimate authority, conformity to social community norms, the safeguarding of pure divine essence against contamination and defilement. That leads people to moralize many activities that don't do anyone harm. Homosexual activity between consenting adults, writing a novel about the Prophet Muhammad, striking up a conversation if you're a single woman with a man that your father has approved of, and so on. Violations of which, as you all know, can lead to actually rather horrific forms of violence.
Okay. So Steve's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think is one of the best books ever written on this topic. If you want to understand this more, I highly recommend Steve's book, as well as his sequel, Enlightenment Now. So I think one of my favorite quotes that I used in The Science of Good and Evil was from Alexander Solzhenitsyn about this dual nature, about what's inside of our human nature, which he wrote in the Gulag Archipelago. If you don't, I'm sure you know who he is by now, but he was, in the Stalin's Gulag system for decades and wrote about this. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? That's it. That says it all. Now, obscuring our understanding of evil is the moralization gap, which is described by Roy Baumeister. Roy is one of the great experimental social psychologists of all time, really interesting fellow here, and his book, this is the other great book on this subject. So he makes a distinction here between the victim's narrative and the perpetrator's narrative. That is, there's two people, well, three if you count the bystanders, in an act of violence, the victim and the perpetrator, and they each see it from a different perspective. So the victim's narrative, for example, is something like this. The perpetrator's actions were incoherent, senseless, incomprehensible. Either that or he was an abnormal sadist, motivated only by a desire to see me suffer, though I was completely innocent. The harm he did is grievous and irreparable, with effects that will last forever. None of us should ever forget it. By contrast, the perpetrator's narrative, at the time, I had good reasons for doing it. Perhaps I was responding to an immediate provocation, or I was just reacting to the situation in a way that any reasonable person would. I had a perfect right to do what I did, and it's unfair to blame me for it. The harm was minor and easily repaired, and I apologized. It's time to get over it and put it behind us. Let bygones be bygones. Okay, Baumeister got these narratives from interviewing dozens or even hundreds, I forget the number, of criminals on death row. These are serial killers, murderers, and so the baddest of the badasses in jail. And he just asked them, "Why'd you do it?" And so they actually had narratives that sounded something like this. Some examples from Roy's book, 1994, Police Record of a Spree Killer. Other than the two we killed, the two we wounded, the woman we pistol whipped, and the light bulbs we stuck in people's mouths, we didn't really hurt anybody. Oh, okay. Or John Wayne Gacy after killing 33 boys. I see myself more as a victim than as a perpetrator. I was cheated out of my childhood. Okay, so these are more than just rationalizations for something you know that it was wrong that you did. It is Baumeister thinks it's a deep feeling that these people had. They think they did the right thing, a moral thing. That's Pinker's point, that there's too much moralization, not that we have a shortage of it. So there's the point of view of the victim versus the point of view of the perpetrator, and then there's the point of view of the scientist studying it. And unfortunately, the point of view of the scientist studying evil is that of the perpetrator. That is, we know how the victims feel about it. Of course they feel that way. Everybody would feel that way. But what does the perpetrator think? To understand why perpetrators perpetrate violence and evil, we have to look at it from a detached, amoral, contextual situation so that evil is explicable. In other words, the point of view of the victim is the point of view of the moralizer. The point of view of the scientist is the point of view of the perpetrator. So, for example, take the victim's perspective versus the perpetrator's perspective in the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of vicious pogroms against Jewish communities that were part of a long history of European anti-Semitism. Or, the Crusades were a brutal invasion of Muslim lands and the start of a long history of humiliation of Islam by Christendom. Or how about that difference in the American Civil War? The American Civil War was necessary to abolish the evil institution of slavery and preserve a nation conceived in liberty and equality. That's certainly the perspective most of us take now. Here's the point of view from the South. The American Civil War was a power grab by a centralized tyranny intended to destroy the way of life of the traditional South. Now, most Southerners don't think like that today, but they certainly did for close to a century after the American Civil War. Or try to see it from Hitler's point of view. What? That's insane. Well, he did have a point of view. And if we're not going to understand Hitler and the Nazis, if we don't take their perspective and think, what were they thinking? And it all goes back to the First World War, the ending of it, and the stab in the back conspiracy theory that the Jews, made the German government, concede victory and sue for peace and so on. And, of course, it ends up in utter ruin by 1945. But that's the only way to understand the Nazis and Hitler, is to delve deep into their thinking. Why did they do this from their perspective? It starts with the belt buckle that the SS soldiers wore. Gott mit uns. God is with us. Okay, so this idea that they're all a bunch of atheists and that's why they committed evil. No, they weren't atheists. Point of view of the victim versus that of the perpetrator. Here's an additional problem. The myth of pure evil is the point of view of the victim. That is, evil is intentional and gratuitous infliction of harm for its own sake, perpetrated by a villain who is malevolent to the bone, inflicted on a victim who is innocent and good. And evil is mostly perpetrated by ordinary people in unordinary circumstances that is rationalized in that sense. I like this quote from Louis Fry Richardson, a meteorologist who later in his life took up the study of war. So he's kind of explaining why he's doing this. Because most people just moralize about war. It's bad. And as he writes, for indignation is so easy and satisfying a mood that it is apt to prevent one from attending to any facts that oppose it. If the reader should object that I have abandoned ethics for the false doctrine that to understand all is to forgive all, I can reply that it is only a temporary suspense of ethical judgment made because to condemn much is to understand little. Again, so the point of this lecture and my books on this subject is that we want to understand the cause of evil, the nature and cause of evil and violence and why bad things happen, not condemn it. We can agree to condemn it, but that's not going to help us understand it. Try taking the perspective of Eichmann and Heydrich. This is Adolf Eichmann on the right and Heydrich on the left here, who is orchestrating the final solution at this very building here. This is at Wannsee, suburb of Berlin, where the Wannsee Conference was held in January of 1942, where they kind of orchestrated the final solution to the Jewish question, that is, the Holocaust. Eichmann wrote in his in his diary, I remember that at the end of this Wannsee Conference, Heydrich, Mueller, and my humble self settled down comfortably by the fireplace, and that then for the first time I saw Heydrich smoke a cigar or a cigarette. And I was thinking, today Heydrich is smoking, something I have not seen before. And he drinks cognac, since I had not seen Heydrich take any alcoholic drink in years. After this Wannsee Conference, we were sitting together peacefully, and not in order to talk shop, but in order to relax after long hours of strain. Sounds like a couple of guys at a corporate conference having a drink afterwards after a long day of work, but that's how they treated it. Or take this letter from SS Obersturmführer Karl Kretschmer from this book by Ernst Klee and his colleagues, The Good Old Days, The Holocaust as Seen by It's perpetrators and bystanders. Okay, so we have a lot of literature by the victims. What we don't have much literature on is by the perpetrators. What were they thinking when they were committing these acts of violence against Jews? Here is one. This guy, okay, he's writing a letter to his wife. Sunday, September 27th, 1942. My dear Soska, I'd like to be with you all. What you see here makes you either brutal or sentimental. As the war is, in our opinion, a Jewish war, the Jews are the first to feel it. Here in Russia, wherever the German soldier is, no Jew remains. You can imagine that at first I needed some time to get to grips with this. There's no room for pity of any kind. You women and children back home could not expect any mercy or pity if the enemy got the upper hand. This is what they were doing. Now, at first, it was hard to get these soldiers to do this close range because blood and brains would splatter all over their uniforms, and they felt disgust about it. I mean, the average person does not want to do this. They have to be trained to do this. But with rifles at a distance, that helps. Even better, gas chambers, and so forth. So, that, again, tells us something about human morality in the brain. He continues on another letter to his wife. October 19th, 1942. If it weren't for the stupid thoughts about what we are doing in this country, the Einsatz here would be wonderful. The Einsatzgruppen were the special action forces that followed the Wehrmacht into the Soviet Union and wiped out, killed all the Jews and Roma, homosexuals, and so forth, anybody they didn't want. Door to door. Anyway, he said he's basically telling his wife, it would be great here, except for this other thing we have to do, since it's put me in a position where I can support you all very well. Since I consider the last Einsatz to be justified, and indeed approve of the consequences it had, the phrase, stupid thoughts, is not strictly accurate. Rather, it is a weakness not to be able to stand the side of dead people. The best way of overcoming it is to do it more often than it becomes a habit. Okay, so this is a little clue into the psychology of evil. If you do it enough, you get used to it. And then the normal repulsive emotions we have about violently killing other people go away. Here I'm talking about people you don't even know, people that haven't done anything to you. You just walk into a town and start killing people. Okay, another good example of this comes from a tape recording we have of Heinrich Himmler's speech he gave at Poznan in Poland, in which he's encouraging his SS generals and colonels to step up to the plate and get with the program of killing more Jews. And so here's just a short excerpt from that.
Ich will auch ein ganz schwieriges Kapitel. Will ich hier vor Arbeit nennen. Es soll zwischen uns ausgesprochen sein, und trotzdem werden wir nicht in der Öffentlichkeit nie darüber reden. Genauso wenig, wie wir am 30. Juni gezögert haben, die befohlene Pflicht zu tun, Kameraden, die verfehlt hatten.
Okay, here he's referring to June 30th, 1934, the night of the Long Knives, when they killed their own people, not just German citizens, although they do that too, but their fellow Nazis who they felt were competing for power and not towing the line, the new direction that the Nazi party had moved into, and so on. And so he's encouraging them, look, we did that. If we can kill our own fellow German Nazis, we should be able to do this. Okay, so about which we have never spoken and never will speak. So they do know this is wrong. These are war crimes, what we would later call war crimes. So this is why they tended not to put these sorts of things in writing.
Gerechtigkeitstakt, dass wir uns untereinander nie darüber unterhalten haben, nie darüber sprachen, es jeden geschaut, jeder war Jahre, was es das nächste Mal tun würde, wenn es empfohlen wird und es notwendig ist. Ich meine Judendevakuierung, die Ausrottung des deutschen Volkes. Es gehört zu denen, die man leicht ausspricht. Das jüdische Volk wird ausgerottet. Fast in jeder Partei. Das gab es im Programm drin. Ausrottung machen wir Gleichigkeit.
So here, by the way, in terms of responding to the Holocaust deniers or revisionists, he's telling us right here what everybody knows. And we have this on tape. You can hear him saying it himself. You know, the Ausrottende Juden, that's it. But now he's going to get to a complaint that everybody knows we're doing this. It's a good thing to do, but everybody has an exception. Somebody they know. Usually that's the case. Someone you know, that's a good Jew, or somebody who works for you that's Jewish, or your doctor is Jewish, or your lawyer is Jewish, or your housekeeper is Jewish, or whatever. And all of them felt like, well, we don't want to exterminate this person because I know this person. They're a good person. Again, and a little hint of the psychology of evil. It's harder to commit evil against people you know.
Und dann kommen alle die braven Millionen Deutsche als seinen Juden, er ist ein prima Jude. Und so gesehen, durchgestanden hat keiner. Von euch werden die meisten wissen, was es heißt, verbleichen bei seinem Leben. Wenn 500 Tali, 1000 Tali. Und dies durchgehalten zu haben. Und dabei abgesehen von menschlichen Ausnahmeschwächen, anständig zu sein.
So here, in a way, he's saying that the more people we kill, the easier it gets. It's hard to kill one person if they're right there in front of you, but if you have 100 or 1,000 and we get used to it, it's kind of the opposite of the adopt a child. You know, one face, one person I care about, but, 100, 500 I don't care about. It's the same principle, but in the, with the reverse emotional valence. Okay, that's enough of Heinrich Himmler's speech. It goes a long ways to explaining what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. This is she was reporting from Jerusalem of the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who had been absconded from South America and hauled back to Israel and put on trial as a war crime, as a war criminal. And Hannah Arendt was reporting, I think it was for the Atlantic, just journal articles. Then she wrote it up into a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And here's the idea that you think you're going to see this evil guy, and instead you get this kind of squirmy-looking bureaucrat, thick-glass bureaucrat. Here's how Baumeister puts it. The essential shock of banality is the disproportion between the person and the crime. The mind reels with the enormity of what this person has done, and so the mind expects to reel with the force of the perpetrator's presence and personality. When it does not, it is surprised. Yet the magnitude gap provides one explanation for the surprise and disappointment at evil's banality. The enormity of the crime is apparent from the victim's perspective, but often to the perpetrator, it was far less enormous. It might seem quite fitting and appropriate to be a rather ordinary, banal person if the crime is viewed from the perpetrator's perspective. Okay, so that helps us see what they were thinking. Eichmann, he just thought himself as a bureaucrat. Or take Maximilian Grabner, the head of the political department at Auschwitz and associate of the camp commander Rudolf Höss. So that's Grabner on the left there, and then Rudolf Höss, the commandant, on the right. I only took part in this crime because there was nothing I could do to change anything. The blame for this crime lay with National Socialism. I myself was never a National Socialist. Okay, they all said this, which was bullshit. But nevertheless, I still had to join the party. I only took part in the murder out of consideration for my family. I was never an anti-Semite and would still claim today that every person has the right to live. Okay, this is just after the fact, hindsight bias rationalization. Of course, most of them knew what they were doing, and anti-Semitism was rampant at the time. Although I've now come to the conclusion that no Hitler, no Holocaust. In fact, no Hitler, no World War II. I think it's another lecture, but I think the case can be made for that. Not that these people weren't anti-Semitic. They were. Most Americans were anti-Semitic, maybe not to the extent that Europeans were. Not just Germans, but Poles as well, and French and so on. Italians, Greeks, and so on. Anti-Semitism was quite rampant in Europe at that time, but not exterminationism. That was a uniquely Nazi, particularly Hitlerian ideology. Okay, that's another issue. So the scientific study of evil begins in the 1960s with Stanley Milgram's famous shock experiments. Most of you probably heard of this. That's Dr. Milgram to the upper left there. He was a social psychologist interested in trying to explain how you get people to do this sort of thing. So his methodology was to get subjects to deliver shocks to innocent people they don't know, just subjects in an experiment. Okay, now they're not really getting shocks. The little box there is a hollow box, just has lights and toggle switches with a little meter that looks like it's delivering shocks, but it's not. The subject who you see being strapped there with the electrodes that's going to get the shock is not getting shocked. He's just a shill that works for Milgram, and he's either repeating the lines that are used for every single test subject, or they use tape recordings of the responses to the shocks. So here's an example of a subject, true subject, that is not a participant, not a shill, delivering these. And so when Milgram first set out to do this, he queried his fellow psychologists, how many people do you think will go? All the way up to 450 volts, labeled XXX, or to 420 volts, danger, severe, or 360 volts, extreme intensity, or 300 volts, intense, and so on. Okay, most of his colleagues thought, only a few percent would go all the way. In fact, almost 2/3 went all the way to 450 volts. That's quite striking. Okay, what does this mean? Well, we're going to look at that. He was able to get the numbers down by bringing the victim into the same room as the subject. So he's sitting there instead of in another room where you don't even see them. That makes a difference, down to 33%. By requiring the subject to force the victim's hand down onto an electrode plate, that reduced it by more than 50% still from that. 33% and 50% down from the percentage who went all the way. And in a 2008 replication by Jerry Berger, in which they went up just 150 volts, which is the point at which Milgram had his subjects, the shills, stop screaming and moaning in response to the shocks. And so he got the same percentage of maximum, but 30% disobeyed the experimenter versus the 17% that disobeyed Milgram's experiment in 1961. Hard to say what that really means. I mean, it's maybe a little bit of moral progress there. People are less likely to do it. It's also possible more and more people have heard of this. Such famous research. I'm amazed when I encounter anybody that's not heard of it. Anyway, there's a nice movie about this. Here's the trailer for this. The movie's called The Experimenter. It's about the life of Stanley Milgram, one of the most interesting social scientists of the last century. And this gives a little hint at that.
A decade earlier.
Sorry. Here's the trailer for that.
Rug, pillow, hair, grass. Incorrect. 165 volts strong shock.
Let me out of here. I will not be part of the experiment anymore.
He says he's not going to go on. Please continue.
He says he doesn't want to go on.
We must continue.
In nearly every case, the essential results are the same. They hesitate, sigh, tremble, and groan, but they advance to the last switch, 450 volts, because they're politely told to.
I'm Stanley Milgram, and this is an experiment. The man in the other room wasn't being shocked.
Let me out of here.
Please go check everything's okay. Continue, please.
We want to get true reactions from people. The experiment's about obeying orders.
You could be dead in there. Please continue.
Social relations. What does that mean?
Everything. The way people talk in elevators, the study of conformity, authority.
How does human beings participate in destructive, inhumane acts?
Why is defiance the anomaly instead of the norm?
Why didn't I stop? Because he told me to continue.
You tell yourself.
I don't. I have a choice.
I wouldn't do that.
Have you done it?
I'd never do that.
That really hurt!
I don't like hurting anyone.
Let me out!
This part's the experiment begins.
Your father's turning into a fictional character.
Critics insist you're callous, deceitful,
No one repugnant was forced.
You're invested in the idea of authority, and you love lording it over all of us.
The person has a choice. He or she chooses obedience. Awareness. Liberation. Life.
Boom. Oh, boy. Well, here's some of the real-world examples of that, how it was done.
A decade earlier, psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me you which teacher.
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud. Horse. Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here.
Continue right on.
Let me out.
The experiment. Continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor, and the so-called shock harmless.
You're gonna get a shot. 180 volts.
I can't stand the rain.
I'm not about to kill it. I mean, who's going to take responsibility for anything that happens? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think so. I'll get no answer. He was hollering bullets. Can't you check it? Is all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
Okay. So let me just say a few remarks about that before I show this next video clip where I replicated Milgram's experiment for a Dateline NBC series we did in 2010 with Chris Hansen. I always mix him up with that guy in The Bachelor, in which we replicated a bunch of famous psych experiments that I showed you a few last time, having to do with change blindness and so forth. Here, we wanted to know if we could still get subjects to go all the way. So we replicated the box, hollow box with nothing in it, and but again, unlike Milgram, we just had time. We just rented a place to do this and so forth. Just had a day to do it for filming. I think we had a total of 7 subjects. Milgram had hundreds of subjects. And the interesting thing about Milgram's, not only has it been replicated, you couldn't really replicate it today with RIBs, that is, research institutional boards that pass judgment on the ethics of experiments like this. You couldn't get approval for this. Today, we only needed to get the approval of the attorneys for NBC who let us do it. But Milgram, and again, Milgram wasn't just doing undergraduates, paying them a couple bucks for beer money to participate in some psych experiment, which is how most of them are done, which maybe part of the replication crisis. But no, he drew on people, not just undergraduates at Yale where he did this, but people, people in the local community, just bus drivers and secretaries and, just adults of various ages, not just 18 to 22-year-old undergraduates. And so, and that's what made the research even more robust. Anyway, so here are the two clips I'll show you from our replication of this, and then I'll have a few implications, ramifications of what I think is going on here. So here's part of the problem. Is it really obedience to authority? That's what Milgram called it. Okay, so are we really measuring obedience? Because you don't know what's going on inside somebody's head. So there's been a lot of debate among psychologists, social scientists, social psychologists, and so on. Is that really what's being measured? Maybe it's kind of a role playing. Like, I'm now playing the role of somebody who does this, and the situation is such that, it encourages you to do so. You're reinforced for doing it, which is not quite the same as obedience to authority. This is more of a horizontal rather than a vertical structure, power structure. And also, to me, watching these subjects that we ran through the experiments, they were really unhappy doing this. And you saw in that clip, Milgram himself was saying they squirm, they're uncomfortable, they groan about having to do it, they don't want to do it, they protest, but they do it. Yeah, but okay, this is what I'm after here is what's actually going on inside somebody's head. What does it take to get somebody to do this? Okay, and so my point is, it's not that easy. Okay, it takes certain circumstances. Also, if you're a subject in an experiment at Yale University, or if you're trying out for a TV reality show as we set it up called What a Pain, you're at NBC Studios in New York City. Do you really think somebody is getting electrocuted and is going to die? I mean, they may be doing something else there. Like, yeah, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I don't know. Somebody is surely taking responsibility for this, and they can't really be hurting people. Okay. Anyway, that's a few of the thoughts I had on that. So let me just show you that, the clip from that. There's two parts here.
Welcome to a casting call for a new reality show called What a Pain.
Thank you so much.
These 6 applicants are here to audition, but as you've probably guessed, the show isn't real. It's a setup to see if we can demonstrate something deeply rooted in all of us. As we explained earlier, we're hardwired to obey our parents. As adults, that survival instinct continues with our need to obey authority. For instance, we listen to the police or firemen in order to avoid danger. But that same instinct to obey can be manipulated, revealing a darker side of our nature. This machine is called a shock generator. It's a replica of one used by social psychologist Stanley Milgram back in the 1960s.
This machine generates electric shock.
He was trying to figure out why so many average German citizens were convinced to go along with the annihilation of the Jews. He proved most people could easily be convinced to inflict harm on others if an authority figure told them it was okay.
Continue, please.
This is how evil happens.
The aspiring contestants on What a Pain certainly aren't evil, but will any of them illustrate just how easily we can all be made to follow order?
So basically, the show is about how pain affects people's behavior.
Meet our first aspiring reality show star.
I want to be on What a Pain because it sounds like a very interesting experience.
She's told the game begins with one player asking questions to test another player's memory.
You can take off your coat.
Emily will be the contestant asking the question. Now, meet Tyler.
You can sit right down here.
He'll be answering the question.
If he gets it right, we move on to the next question.
Okay, we had a little technical glitch there with the video and this particular program I'm running. So I'm going to pick it up here. I'm playing these video clips of the replication of Milgram's experiments. This was a setup in New York City for a proposed television reality show called What a Pain, and we're interviewing contestants, in which we got 6 to actually participate. Our 7th one just saw what was going on and probably knew about it or just said that's not her thing. So here we go.
actually be shocked, but Emily doesn't know that. Our casting director, Jeremy, asks Tyler to memorize 20 pairs of words. Emily will be testing him on them in a minute.
So for instance, hair color, bird wing, blue box, wild duck, ink printer.
Then Jeremy prepares to strap Tyler into our version of an electric chair. Remember, it's just a fake. Will Emily be willing to shock Tyler each time he answers incorrectly?
So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put a little of this gel on your wrist.
Emily has seen enough.
Yeah, I saw.
This isn't really my thing.
No?
No. Sorry.
You don't want to try it out?
No, thank you, though. I think I like being
Why
just,
not?
It's just not my thing. I thought... No.
Emily has no interest in shocking Tyler.
Okay, nice to meet you.
We have your contact info.
Okay.
Thank you.
But there are 5 other reality star wannabes. Will they obey? This is Julie. She watches intently as our casting director straps Tyler in.
I'm just going to get Tyler all wired up. Here we are.
Then she's escorted next door and given instructions on how to use the machine. She doesn't know she's being recorded on hidden camera.
Each time he gets one wrong, you will go up in voltage, right? All the way until the test is completed.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Great. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it.
The voltage marked on the machine goes from a mild 15 volts to a potentially lethal 450 volts. And just so you know, the voltage that comes from our home socket is only 120 volts, but the machine is really a hollow box and doesn't generate electricity. If any contestant appears emotionally distraught, we'll stop the game and reveal Tyler was just acting.
Okay, the second word is bird, and the options are 1.
The right answer is number 2, but Tyler pushes number 4, intentionally giving the wrong answer. What will Julie do?
So now you're going to get a little 15 shock volt coming at you.
Again, he answers incorrectly. And again.
Okay, Tyler, you got that one wrong. The next one is 75 volts.
At this point, we've instructed Tyler to cry out in pain. Will Julie continue zapping Tyler?
I don't think I want to keep doing this.
Please continue.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think I want to.
It's absolutely imperative that you continue.
It's imperative that I continue. I think that I'm okay with it. I think I'm good.
Our casting director, acting as the authority figure, doesn't let up.
You really have no other choice. I need you to continue until the end of the test.
No, I'm sorry. I just see where this is going, and I think I'm good. I think I'm good to go.
Julie stands her ground. Her compliance only goes so far.
Well, I just want to introduce you to a colleague of mine, okay? You mind?
Okay.
I'm Chris Hansen.
Okay.
And this is for a television show, but it's actually for Dateline NBC.
I'm kidding.
And what was going through your mind as he was trying to convince you to stay and continue to shock the contestant?
I didn't want to hurt Tyler, and then I just wanted to get out. And I'm mad that I let it even go 5. I'm sorry, Tyler.
Tyler tells her he was never shocked.
Making sure I'm all okay in one piece.
Julie stopped zapping Tyler after 5 wrong answers, but there are other contestants ready to take their turn at the machine.
Okay. We'll go to the part 2 of this.
We're doing a series of social experiments on things like obedience to authority.
We're trying to find out if these aspiring actors will follow their hardwired impulse to obey authority and shock someone simply because they're told it's okay.
Please continue.
They think they're here to be on a reality show called What a Pain, where it's all part of the game to administer electric shocks to fellow contestants. This woman drew the line.
I think I'm going to leave now.
What will our next contestant do? She's bubbling over with enthusiasm as she enters the room, but will it last?
It's going to hurt. But no permanent damage will occur.
She watches as Tyler, who's working with us, is attached to what looks like an electrode and strapped into our makeshift electric chair.
So this little gizmo is our voltage generator.
Okay.
Remember, Tyler isn't really getting shocked, but Latifah doesn't know that.
I am the worst when it comes to pain. You could just pluck me and I'm like, ah!
She's told to zap him and increase the intensity with each wrong answer.
Perfect.
As our hidden cameras roll, you can see Latifah is visibly upset each time she has to shock Tyler.
I will administer 120 volts.
Okay, guys, this really hurts.
Please continue.
You can hear her voice begin to crack.
That was incorrect. I will administer 135 volts. That was incorrect. I will administer 150 volts.
Hey, that's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. I refuse to go on.
She gets more distraught with each wrong answer, but keeps on following orders.
I will administer 180 volts.
Get me out of here. I refuse to go on. Let me out.
Oh my gosh. I'm getting I can't.
Please go on.
She's clearly upset. Her earlier enthusiasm gone.
I know I'm not the one feeling the pain, but I hear him screaming and asking to get out, and it's almost like my instinct and gut is stop, because you're hurting somebody and you don't even know why you're hurting them outside of the fact that it's for a TV show.
Please continue.
The next subject is wine.
Now we've instructed our actor, Tyler, to stop answering questions and to stop screaming out in pain.
If you don't respond within 20 seconds, I would have to administer 300 volts.
Okay.
The room becomes eerily quiet, and yet Latifah keeps shocking. But she seems so disturbed that I decide it's time to go in and give her a break.
Hey Latifah, I'm Chris Hansen with NBC. You looked a little upset. I thought maybe we should interrupt here.
Hi.
You okay?
Yeah.
Were you getting a little upset?
Yeah, my heart's beating really fast.
All right, well, calm down. Now, why did you continue to shock him?
I didn't know what was going to happen to me if I stopped.
What was it about Jeremy that convinced you that you should keep going here?
He had no emotion. I was afraid of him.
We'll get back to Latifah in a minute. Right now, another contestant is ready to go. So far, our participants have been women. How will a man do?
And it's just a very simple piece of equipment.
Will he stand up to our casting director? Aaron Neat gets right into the game and quickly works his way up the shock panel.
Hope you don't miss this because the voltage is going to be 105.
While Aaron Neat seems sympathetic, he doesn't hesitate to flick the switch.
I'm really sorry. We are now at 120 volt.
He never questions the authority of the casting director sitting right behind him. He's praised for following orders.
Good job.
So he keeps on shocking him.
We are at 180 volt.
It's not that he doesn't seem to feel his pain.
Hey, Tyler. Does it hurt? I'm sorry. Here's the number 21.
But he goes on.
Ay, ay, ay. Oh, I'm going to hurt you, and I'm really sorry. Come on. You can do this. You can do this. We are almost through.
Good.
Okay, let's continue.
Now we've reached the point where Tyler goes silent.
So that's
We're almost there.
Will Aaron Neat finally stand up to authority?
Please give me an answer, or I'm going to free 405 volt in your body.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. I hope you're doing all right over there.
Finally, 450 volts.
This is going to hurt.
The maximum voltage of the machine.
Good.
Hey, I'm wondering, what was he thinking?
How did it go today?
Great. I like it, yeah.
Did it bother you to shock him?
Oh, yeah, it did. Actually, it did. And that, especially when he wasn't answering anymore.
Now, what impact do you think 350 volts has on you? Death. Were you worried that maybe you would electrocute Tyler?
No, of course, no.
So you believe the producers of the show had it all set up to
Of course. So otherwise I wouldn't go on. What's the point?
Now, the next thing I want to do is bring in Tyler because I want you to know that he's actually okay.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad to see that. I didn't hurt you, actually, did I?
No.
Yeah, I had Jeremy here telling me, keep going. I was like, well, it should be everything all right.
He's a pretty good host here, wasn't he?
Yeah. So, let's say that I left all the responsibilities up to him and not to me.
We asked psychologist Michael Shermer what was going on here.
They're all looking at your actor for the cue that, is this okay?
In other words, if an authority figure says the behavior is acceptable,
You can do this. We are almost through.
Good.
it becomes acceptable.
And boy, your actor was good. I mean, he had that authoritative look and voice down, and of course that's how it works in the real world.
And just like Dr. Milgram's 1960s results proved, apparently the human impulse to believe what we shouldn't and go along with authority is alive and well. Think you wouldn't obey? 5 of our 6 contestants willingly administered shocks. 3 went all the way to the maximum voltage.
I got no more.
Remember Latifah? We stopped her because she seemed anguished almost every step of the way.
Latifah, there's something I've got to tell you.
Yes.
This is going to be on TV, but it's going to be on Dateline NBC.
Oh my God! Are you serious?
We're doing a series of social experiments
Oh my
to
God!
determine why people act the way they do.
Where's Tyler?
Hey, Tyler, come on in, buddy.
Tyler! Oh my
Tyler
gosh.
is an actor who helped us out, and he did not get hurt
Oh
one
my
bit.
gosh! I thought it was hurting you.
Dr. Shermer says any one of us can be manipulated into believing and doing things we shouldn't. He says it happens gradually.
The abuse gets a little bit worse and a little bit worse, such that your standards of tolerance get readjusted upwards to where you're willing to impose even more evil than you ever normally would do.
So how can we stop ourselves from being gullible? The key, Dr. Shermer says, is to be conscious of our vulnerabilities.
The rub here is to find that balance between having a mind open enough that you can accept good opportunities, but not so open-minded you end up believing in any and all wacky ideas that come along. There's a balance in there somewhere, and that's difficult to find.
No hug for Jeremy, huh? So the next time you hear a little voice inside saying, warning, pay attention.
So what do you think the lesson of all this is? I mean, it's a little fresh, very emotional.
The lesson that I keep having to learn,
Yeah.
follow my freaking gut.
There you go.
My instinct was telling me stop, and I kept going for whatever reason.
Yeah, it was hard. All right, this lecture is getting pretty long. I think I'm going to wrap it up here and make it a 2-parter because I have like another hour of material on social conditions that lead to people to commit evil. But I just want to reflect a little bit. Here's what I wrote about all this research in the Moral Arc. What are we to make of these results? In the 1960s, the heyday of belief in the blank slate, taken to mean human behavior is almost infinitely malleable. Milgram's data seems to confirm the idea that degenerate acts are primarily the result of degenerate environments, Nazi Germany being perhaps the ultimate example. In other words, there are no bad apples, just bad barrels. Milgram's interpretation of the data included what he called the agentic state, which is the condition a person is in when he sees himself as an agent for carrying out another person's wishes, and they therefore no longer see themselves as responsible for their actions. Yeah, okay, maybe that's part of it. I don't think it's just a matter of evil. Basically, we're good, but that we're put into bad environments, evil environments, and so they make us evil. First of all, that ignores our human nature, which, as we've already seen, is loaded with moral emotions toward the negative side of the valence there. And two, it discounts free will, volition, that you make choices. Here's what I wrote about that. That would just some reflection on other interpretations of Milgram's experiments here. Let me get rid of that. Doesn't help there. In the sociobiological and evolutionary psychology revolutions of the 1980s and 1990s, the interpretation of Milgram's results shifted toward the nature-biological end of the spectrum from its previous emphasis on nature, on nurture, environment. The interpretation softened somewhat as the multidimensional nature of human behavior was taken into account. As it is with most human action, moral behavior is incredibly complex and includes an array of causal factors, obedience to authority being just one among many. The shock experiments didn't actually reveal just how primed all of us are to inflict violence for the flimsiest of excuses. That is, it isn't a simple case of bad apples looking for a bad barrel in order to cut loose. Rather, the experiments demonstrate that all of us have conflicting moral tendencies that lie deep within. Our moral nature includes a propensity to be sympathetic, kind, and good to our fellow kith and kin and friends, as well as an inclination to be xenophobic, cruel, and evil to tribal others. And the dials for all these can be adjusted up and down depending on a wide range of conditions and circumstances, perceptions and states of mind, all interacting in a complex suite of variables that are difficult to tease apart. In point of fact, most of the 65% of Milgram subjects who went all the way to 450 volts did so with great anxiety, as did the subjects in our NBC replication. And it's good to remember that 35% of Milgram subjects were exemplars of the disobedience to authority. They quit in defiance of what the authority figure told them to do. And then I reference Berger's experiment here. In fact, in a 2008 partial replication by the social psychologist Jerry Berger, in which he ran the voltage box up to only 150 volts, the point at which the learner in Milgram's original experiment began to cry out in pain, it was found that twice as many subjects refused to obey the authority figure. Assuming these subjects were not already familiar with the experimental protocols, which I'm skeptical of, the findings are an additional indicator of moral progress from the 1960s to the 2000s, caused, I would argue, by the ever-expanding moral sphere and our collective capacity to take the perspective of another, in this case, the to-be-shocked learner. Milgram's model comes dangerously close to suggesting that subjects are really just puppets devoid of free will, which effectively lets Nazi bureaucrats off the hook as mere agentic automatons in an extermination engine run by the great paper-pushing administrator Adolf Eichmann, whose actions as an unremarkable man in a morally bankrupt and conformist environment were famously described by Hannah Arendt as the banality of evil. The obvious problem with this model is that there can be no moral accountability if an individual is truly nothing more than a mindless zombie whose every action is controlled by some nefarious mastermind. Anyway, so I think those are the just a couple of the deeper problems with this research. Again, you know, when we conduct experiments like this, we're imagining that we know what is going on inside the minds of people. That's very difficult to do. Obedience to authority, role-playing, de-individuation, all these social psychological influences and persuasive techniques that I'll cover in the next lecture on this. They all have a role to play, for sure, as well as our deep biological nature and the evolutionary logic behind committing violence and aggression and even homicide, as I started this lecture off with, are all part of the formula. So in terms of answering the question, you know, how do you get people to do this? Well, you know, we've just laid out a bunch of different ways. And in part 2 of this lecture, I'll get into more of the social and sociological and social more cultural, environmental effects that definitely do have a huge role in getting people down the pathway to evil. Anyway, thanks for listening again. I know this was a long lecture, a lot of video clips. Keep it entertaining as well as illustrative of the points I'm trying to make. I hope this is okay for you. It's weird for me to give lectures with no audience. I know it's probably hard to watch this, but in any case, we'll see you next time.